ahead and get started. Just make sure it's recording. Yeah, we're good. All right, so welcome everybody. This is the first virtual convening for the Ohio Food Policy Network. We have designed a series of virtual convenings each month of the year on the third Thursday of each month. And these are to provide some continued connection and co-learning for the network. If you're new to the network is made up of interested people and organizations who share a common vision for the food system in Ohio. Ohio Food Policy Network's vision is to realize a food system in Ohio that is sustainable, healthful, equitable, resilient, and accessible. Today we have Amalie Lipstreu from the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. She will be our first speaker. I will give you a little bio background on her in just a second. So a little bit of housekeeping rules. All of you on the call today are muted, just so you know, but you can utilize the Q&A tool you'll see at the bottom of the screen, where you can submit questions for Amalie to answer. During the talk, we'll also launch a couple polling questions to help assess some of your background on the Farm Bill and such. This will be recorded and archived on the Ohio Food Policy Network website. So if you want to revisit this talk or share this talk with others, you'll be able to do so shortly after today. So Amalie has more than 25 years of public and social service experience. Her first professional vocation was social work, where she provided geriatric counseling and group therapy. From there, she worked in the area of vocational evaluation with adults, as well as students with special needs. After earning a graduate degree in public policy from Kent State University, Amalie began her career in environmental policy, focusing on agriculture and food systems. Working in farmland preservation and food policy, Amalie saw that Ohio was uniquely positioned to wake the sleeping giant of economic development that is local food systems. Her research and advocacy work led to the development of the Ohio Food Policy Advisory Council, established by the former Governor Ted Strickland through executive order. Amalie was approached to manage the council in a new Office of Sustainable Agriculture at the Ohio Department of Agriculture. She now manages the policy program for the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, also known as OEFFA. And in that capacity, she works on organic and sustainable agriculture and food policy at the state and federal level. So thank you, Amalie, for joining us today, and you can take it off.
Thanks so much, Amanda. It's great to be here. I'm going to go ahead and start this PowerPoint for you all to take a look at. And really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about the Farm Bill. It's a really critical time, and the Farm Bill is so broad-reaching. I don't know that people always have a sense of the total impact of this bill. So we're going to take just a little bit of time today to talk about how the Farm Bill is structured, a little bit of how things work and what the timeline looks like, as well as opportunities for you to engage, make sure that your ideas and thoughts and those of people that you advocate for are being heard as this legislation is developed. And again, as Amanda said, you know, there is opportunity to provide, to type in questions and even provide feedback during the webinar today. So please make sure to take an opportunity to do that. Before we get started, I just wanted to share some remarks that were put out there recently by the former Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack, about the Farm Bill, because I think it's really pertinent to the discussion that we're going to be having today. Secretary Vilsack said that the new Farm Bill is going to be especially constrained by passage of the recent tax plan, which sharply reduces taxes on the wealthy and large companies, as well as by concerns about the size of the federal budget. So what that means is that as proponents for provisions in the next Farm Bill, we're going to have to work harder than ever to make sure that, that again, our views are heard and that we're educating folks on the importance of some of these provisions. And just to give a real high-level overview before we get started, most people realize that, you know, the Farm Bill is about farmers, about helping farmers compete, providing credit for beginning farmers, protecting farmers against farm losses. But you know, critically, it's also about making sure healthy food is available and affordable, making sure that we're supporting rural economic development, protecting natural resources and producing energy, and investing in food and farmers. So we'll go into a lot more specifics here in just a few minutes, but we just wanted to give you that little bit of a high-level overview. Amanda introduced me, and again, I'm really glad to have Amanda on the call, who does community development work with Extension in Cuyahoga County and has a lot of expertise that she can bring as well. But we want to make sure we know who you are and who we've got on the call as well. So Amanda's going to put up a little poll for us to get a sense of who's joining us today. So take a look at some of those choices that Amanda's put up on the screen and select which of the following best describes you, your organization, or background. And again, you can pick more than one of those. So just take a minute and let us know where you're coming from and what your perspective is. That'll help us make sure we're speaking to you today. And I'm not sure, I think we should be able to see those live results. Are you seeing those, Amanda?
I can see them. If they can't, I can go ahead and read them.
It'd be great to see who's on the call with us today.
All right. So we have 22 out of 30 votes, so maybe I'll give it a few more seconds.
Okay.
Missing about 6, but we can go ahead and start them. So for the poll, we have about 50% of the people on the call are from a nonprofit, 21% government, 8% public institution, 29% Ohio citizen, 13% farmer, 13% extension professional, 8% nutritional professional, and 21% who are with the Food Policy Council, which is very exciting.
Well, that's wonderful. We got a great cross-section of people on the call. So we appreciate the work that you do and your background, and hopefully we can answer questions you have about the Farm Bill in the next 45 minutes or so. So let's see here. Here we go. Before we get started, I just wanted to make sure that you had some basic information about OEFFA. The Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association has been around for almost 40 years. It consists of an educational organization as well as a certification agency. We host the annual Sustainable Agriculture Conference. That's the largest sustainable ag conference in the state of Ohio. We'll be bringing together about 1,200 people in Dayton, Ohio in February. If you're interested, please go to OEFFA.org and you can find information about conference. It's a great opportunity for people to learn more about food systems and sustainable agriculture. We also work with Ohio State, Central State University, as well as other community partners in providing farm tours. Those are great opportunities for organic and sustainable farmers to learn from each other, for people who aren't farmers to get on these farms and learn a little bit more about what's happening in the community landscape. We also provide in-depth workshops, webinars, and a local food guide that's on our website. One of the things that's a newer component of OEFFA is that we're one of a few organizations in Ohio that have received a grant from the USDA from the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. About a year and a half ago, OEFFA started a Begin Farming Ohio program, which provides apprenticeship opportunities for people who are interested in getting into farming, a Heartland Farm Beginnings curriculum, a lot of educational information and technical assistance for beginning and aspiring farmers. So that's a great new program that's available from OEFFA. And as Amanda mentioned, we do work on public policy. So I work at the state and the federal level, advancing OEFFA's objectives for sustainable and organic agriculture, as well as for healthy local and regional food systems that help support community resiliency. And finally, I mentioned the organic certification piece. This is really kind of like part of the origin of OEFFA. We provide organic certification to farmers in probably more than 30 states and are accepting new applications from farmers in about 10 Midwest states. We also provide transitional education for people who are in the process of transitioning to organic, as well as a lot of on-demand educational assistance to farmers. So pretty broad swath of information. So we've got another quick poll before we jump into the meat to just get a sense of how well you understand the Farm Bill. And again, Amanda's going to put a few choices on your screen and think about, where you're at with your understanding of the Farm Bill right now and select one of those options. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that before we get started.
For this one, Amalie, I think they can select multiple.
You can select multiples on this one as well?
I think so.
So has everybody pretty well completed that poll, Amanda?
24 out of 32.
Okay. So if you just take a minute and make sure you've clicked on one of the choices on that poll, that's great information for us to make sure we're giving you the information that you're looking for today.
All right, so I'll go ahead and close the poll.
Okay.
And I think I can share the results this time. Let's see.
Oh, wonderful.
Yay. Learning as we go.
That's great. Well, it's good to know. It looks like 52% of people who are on the webinar today have some knowledge of the Farm Bill titles and programs. But there's, a little bit more definitely that we can learn about the process, about how to engage, and a little bit more about the structure of the Farm Bill. So thanks for taking the time to answer that question. And one caveat I'll just share is just that, the Farm Bill is really complex. I would not presume to say that I'm an expert on the Farm Bill. This will be the first Farm Bill I've been really engaged with. OEFFA is a member of a couple of national coalitions, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, as well as the National Organic Coalition. And we do a lot of work with those national partners and those lobbyists to advance some of the priorities that we'll talk about today. But there's a lot to understand with the Farm Bill. So I would say don't feel bad if you feel like you don't know all there is to know, because I know I certainly don't. We're all learning in this process. So just to dive deeper into the mechanics of the Farm Bill, what we'll talk about specifically is the structure of the Farm Bill, some of the titles, and some examples of programs within those titles. Some historical background, though. The reason that we do have a Farm Bill is because of some critical issues that were occurring in the 1930s. We had the Dust Bowl, which impacted farmers. We had an incredible oversupply problem, along with the Great Depression. So those three events really converged to provide the impetus for the creation of the first Farm Bill. And that's also when the Soil Conservation Society was created. And so it's good to know that, the Farm Bill has its foundations in conservation. Of course, it's been really dramatically modified since then. And about every 5 years, members of Congress put together this legislation, which sets the rules of the road for our nation's food and farming system. The Farm Bill contains policies, programs, and funding, everything from rules around who's eligible for a farm loan to funding for food assistance for low-income families and rural energy, renewable energy, and rural development programs. So let's jump right into some of those titles and programs. And I don't necessarily want to take the time to read all of these titles to you today, but you can see that there's 12 different titles in the Farm Bill, and there's some examples of programs under those titles that you can see. And some of the ones that I'll call out that may be really pertinent to people who are on the call today are Title II. The conservation program is certainly an important title for us at OEFFA and for a lot of the people who care about sustainable food systems. You know, that will incorporate some of those environmental components that are important to people. Many farmers utilize the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. The Conservation Stewardship Program is a working lands program for farmers that are actively engaged in production, and it supports good conservation practices on working lands. And I'll say that the CSP program was really created by folks in the sustainable agriculture movement years ago. Conservation Reserve is a program that's utilized by many farmers, and the Agricultural Conservation Easement Purchase Program is really critical in making sure that we're permanently protecting land so that we have land available for farming in the future. So that conservation title is really important. Title IV is really important to, I'm sure, many of us on the call today. The nutrition title, which makes up the lion's share of the funding. And we'll talk about some of the expenditures in these areas in just a few minutes. But, you know, the nutrition title basically contains the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance or SNAP program. The research program, Title VII, sustainable agriculture, research and extension, having folks like Amanda and other extension professionals that are available to provide community economic development, technical assistance to farmers, education, and assist with research is a really important title. And another one I think is really important to highlight is Title X. And we'll go into more depth, I think, on this title in just a few minutes. But the Specialty Crops and Hort title will include things like the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Program, the National Organic Certification Cost Share, and the Specialty Crop Programs. So that title has a lot of meat for local and regional food systems development, and that's a really important one. I'll talk briefly about Title 10 or Title 11 in a few minutes, but crop insurance is something that's kind of gaining a lot more attention in terms of, you know, where the money is being spent and how we create structures that can either incentivize conservation or disincentivize conservation and either support or create barriers for beginning farmers. So we'll talk about that in a couple minutes as well. And Title 12 is really important as well because that's providing outreach and assistance for minority veteran farmers and ranchers. So this is just a quick overview of some of those major titles and some of the programs associated with those titles. This graphic provides a nice visual of just how those resources for the Farm Bill are allocated. Now, I'm sure that most of the folks on the call today are familiar with this, but a lot of folks don't realize that even though we call it the Farm Bill, 80% of the allocation for the Farm Bill goes to nutrition, mostly to the SNAP program. So projected outlays for crop insurance, conservation, and commodities represent about another 19%. And that includes both mandatory and discretionary funding. And it's really important just to take a minute to talk about the differences in mandatory and discretionary funding and how that plays out over the 5 years of the Farm Bill. Programs that have mandatory funding are provided funds either as needed or up to a level that's specified in the law, and they're not supposed to be subject to annual appropriations decisions by Congress. So what that means is, theoretically, once mandatory funding is set up in the Farm Bill, that amount of money should at least be allocated on a yearly basis. But that hasn't been the case always, especially in recent years. There's been something used called chimps. And if you ever hear the term chimps related to appropriations, what that stands for is changes in mandatory program spending in that annual appropriation cycle. And so even though this funding is supposed to be mandatory, it's really not mandatory. And it forces advocates working on these issues, people who care about conservation, care about nutrition and local food systems, to lobby Congress not to cut funding for these important programs each year. And again, I would just hearken back to those comments that I made in the beginning about how much scrutiny there's going to be on all of these allocations in the Farm Bill. There's a sense of wanting to cut that funding as much as possible. So it's going to be really important for us to be actively engaged. The programs that have discretionary funding can be funded up to a level that's provided for in the legislation, but Congress can decide each year what level of funding to appropriate for those discretionary programs, if any. So once program expenditures reach that level appropriated for that year, no additional funds can be spent unless Congress provides new appropriations. And again, I take the time to talk a little bit about the yearly appropriations because this is just so critical. People tend to think that once the Farm Bill is established and we've got these levels authorized in law, we've done the work. We know that, the issues we care about are hopefully supported in the Farm Bill and will receive funding each year. But it is going to require a lot of advocacy to make sure that, we get the funding that has been specified for in the Farm Bill in the coming years. They're expecting that for the 2014 Farm Bill, it'll end up costing about $875 billion, but that's over a 10-year period. So that's just a little bit about kind of the appropriations and the financial piece of the Farm Bill. I mentioned that we take a few minutes just talking about Title 11, which is where crop insurance is. And the reason that we're going to focus on that a little bit is, there are a lot of structural issues in the Farm Bill, things that receive funding and provide a lot of incentives for farmers to farm certain crops and to grow in certain ways. In the past, there were a lot of direct supports in terms of direct payments to farmers. And what's happened with the Farm Bill over the past couple of cycles is that there's been a transition away from that. And the lion's share of support that farmers receive is through crop insurance. So, farmers get crop insurance. Not all farmers use crop insurance, but the ones that do, on average, 62% of their cost of crop insurance is subsidized by the federal government, subsidized by taxpayers. And we also subsidize the insurance companies that provide that and administer those policies for farmers. So you can see in the graph on the right that while in 2001, this was about $2 billion worth of expenditures, it grew to over $11 billion in 2011. The leadership on the House and Senate side has said that crop insurance cannot be touched, that this is something that's really important. And we do agree that crop insurance is a critical part of providing a safety net for farmers, but I think it's very important that we take a look at the ways that we provide that crop insurance to be sure that it's not providing disincentive to conservation. And I'll give you just a brief example with that. There are the agency that oversees crop insurance is called the Risk Management Agency, and they provide the rules of the road for the crop insurance program. Not all of the practices that the Natural Resource Conservation Service supports, things like cover crops, are recognized as good farming practices under the Risk Management Agency. They have rules that govern things like cover crops and when they should be planted and when those crops should be terminated. Because farmers can be penalized if they do something such as terminate a cover crop too soon, many farmers are reticent to use those practices, which in Ohio, for example, we know are critically important in not just building on-farm fertility, but also in minimizing the loss of soil and the loss of nutrients that's created harmful algal blooms. So that's just one example of how something like that may seem kind of unrelated and obscure, like crop insurance, can have an impact on conservation. It has impacts certainly on the overall cost of the Farm Bill, and it also has very real impacts on the ability of beginning farmers to compete for land purchase and land rents. So this is just a little slide to highlight some of the local food funding that's been received in Ohio over a 5-year period of time. And it's important to note that, local food funding has definitely not always been part of the Farm Bill. It is relatively recent, and we've had a great champion in Ohio in Senator Sherrod Brown in championing a lot of these local food provisions. A really important piece of the local food programs that are currently in the Farm Bill is these programs don't have what's called baseline funding. And just to quickly summarize what that means is that when this Farm Bill expires in September of 2018, unless there is overwhelming support and local food programs are rewritten into the Farm Bill, these programs will all disappear. So if you are a person who works in extension, who's part of a local food policy council, works within government, trying to improve healthy food access, sees the benefits of local and regional food systems for community economic development and health and the environmental benefits to your community, this is something to really be aware of. Again, there will be many things that are going to be looked to be cut in the upcoming Farm Bill, so it's important to know that this may be one of those things that will require your support in the coming months. And so this is, again, 5-year funding for some programs in farm to institution, marketing and promotion. Just to give you an example of how in just that 4 to 5 year period of time, there were 22 projects just focused on marketing and promotion in Ohio that provided almost $2 million in support to projects that were conducted at Ohio State University, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, as well as nonprofit organizations. We had 17 infrastructure projects and 14 projects focused on increasing healthy food access in Ohio. So the bottom line is, this funding brought in well over $5 million into Ohio during that period of time. And I'm sure we've seen similar and greater investments in other parts of the country as well. So let's just take a couple of minutes to look at, how this process is supposed to, how it's supposed to work, where we're at in that process now, and where we might be able to have some influence in the coming weeks and months ahead. The infographic on the left side of your screen was put together by the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and provides that quick outline of how the process is supposed to work. So basically, the House and Senate agricultural committees put together their draft of what they think the Farm Bill should look like. And to take a step back from that for a minute, before that's done, there's usually a lot of time for feedback. Actually, over a lot of 2017, members of the House Ag Committee had some national hearings around the country where they could solicit feedback from farmers and others on what they thought should be in this draft Farm Bill. Senator Brown in Ohio had listening sessions throughout the state to get feedback on what people felt was important and to make sure he was hearing from his constituents. But if you didn't get a chance to participate in any of those listening sessions or hearings, it's not too late. There's definitely still an opportunity for you to make your voice heard, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So after the Senate and the House come up with their draft bill, it goes to the floor of Congress, where they debate the bill and floor amendments are offered. That's a really important opportunity where additional input can come into play during those changes that happen on the full floor of the House or the Senate. After they pass those bills out, it goes to a conference committee that works to resolve any differences in those two bills. It goes back to the House and the Senate for a final vote before it goes to the President for signature. So that's just a quick overview of how that process is supposed to work. And of course, there can be delays and changes in the process. With the last Farm Bill, it didn't get done on time. And that caused a problem and created what they called stranded programs. Programs that didn't have that baseline funding that I mentioned earlier, and that would not, had to go without funding until the final 2014 Farm Bill was put together. So that illustrates two things. It illustrates the importance of programs having baseline funding, so they have continued funding if there are political stalemates. And it also illustrates how important it is to just be part of that process. Now, the little box on your right is to show you the timeline of where we're at now. And there was an update on this morning on the Politico Morning Ag Report. Basically said that the House version of the Farm Bill is projected to be released in March. They're doing an analysis, a fiscal analysis to know what that might look like, but we probably will see something from the House come out in March. The Senate is a little bit further behind in terms of getting a draft bill out and released, so we don't have definitive on that yet, but it's likely that there will be some floor debate perhaps this summer. And again, we're really hopeful that this process concludes before September so we don't have stranded programs. So we're going to take a little bit of time just to talk about how to engage, to talk about some of the marker bills that are out there, what they are, what they look like, and how you can have an impact moving forward. As I mentioned before, Sherrod Brown is once again championing local and regional food systems investments. And these are really critical investments that benefit local communities, create jobs, and contribute to both urban and rural communities across states across the country. And I want to just highlight a few of the things in the Local Farms Act that I think folks on this webinar would care about today. The Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Program has been used extensively since that program's been created. And the Local Farms Act would increase annual mandatory funding for that program from $30 million to at least $40 million a year. It would provide some changes to the value-added producer grant and codify the USDA Value Chain Coordinators, or the Food Link program, which has provided key personnel to help communities around the state in creating these value chains and building local and regional food systems, and provide up to $10 million per year in mandatory funding. And again, one of the key parts of the Local Farms Act that Senator Brown has introduced is that it would provide a level of that baseline funding for local food systems. The National Organic Certification Cost Share is also part of this initiative, as well as a harvesting health pilot. This program would basically add a new section and allow the Food and Nutrition Service to conduct produce prescription pilot programs that create partnerships allowing emergency feeding organizations or other folks, health clinics or doctors, to prescribe fresh fruits and vegetables to low-income patients to demonstrate and then evaluate the impact of those programs in reducing healthcare utilization, as well as addressing food insecurity and supporting local healthcare, supporting local ag and reducing healthcare utilization costs. So there's also a Food is Medicine working group in the House Hunger Caucus that's advancing this and other types of initiatives. So again, on the Senate side, that's Senate Bill 1947, introduced by Senator Sherrod Brown. And, you know, we're really working hard now to try and get bipartisan support and some co-sponsors for this act. It's also been introduced at the House side by Senator Shelley Pingree from Maine, and it's got a broad base of bipartisan support already. So that's just one example of, again, a marker bill that is put out there to kind of test the waters, to get reaction on these types of initiatives, to assess the level of support and build support. And as I'm sure you're all aware, building bipartisan support has become an increasing challenge with Congress. So another example that is a really important one to share is a marker bill that's focused on resources for beginning farmers. Beginning farmers face many challenges. And, you know, as the next farm bill is put into law, we're going to see approximately 100 million acres change hands. That's a huge opportunity and a huge challenge. We've got the average age of farmers nationally approaching 60, but we also have a huge cohort of energized, excited, and capable young people that have experience, that are interested in getting into farming, but face huge challenges and barriers in trying to enter farming and be successful in farming. So one of the marker bills that's been introduced is called the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Opportunity Act. This program would prioritize projects to promote and maintain farm viability, protect farmland affordability, and include something called an option to purchase at agricultural value, which is really important in controlling the costs of farmland, even farmland that's protected by permanent easements. It would create set-asides for beginning farmers in programs like the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, that we talked about earlier. It would increase beginning farmers set aside from 5 to 15% in the Conservation Stewardship Program. And another really important example is just the cost of land and acquiring a farm is such a challenge for beginning farmers. Currently, if a farmer wants to get a direct farm ownership loan and goes to an agency such as the Farm Service Agency, the maximum loan limit is $300,000. It's really not a lot of money when you consider the costs of buying a home, a land, and all of the assets that are necessary to purchase a farm. So this marker bill, and hopefully if the provisions that are included in this marker bill are included in the final farm bill, would increase the maximum loan amount to $500,000, and that's really important. It would provide some borrower training as well as increased funding and support for programs like the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program and the Begin Farming Program I mentioned that OEFFA is conducting under that grant program. So there's many other provisions in this, things that relate to research, things that relate to crop insurance. Just one more quick example on that. I mentioned some of the differences in these different agencies under USDA. Under most of the USDA programs, the definition of a beginning farmer is someone with 10 years or less of farming experience. With the crop insurance programs, the risk management agency defines a beginning farmer as someone with 5 years or less of experience. So that's just another example of ways we can improve these programs so that we have consistency across USDA. We can provide greater support to beginning farmers. So some of the key players that you should know about in terms of your efforts to engage and advocate on these issues, clearly the folks who are involved in the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees, but that doesn't mean if you live in an area and your member of Congress isn't on the Ag Committee, that they shouldn't hear from you and that they aren't going to have an important input into the process, especially during that part of the process we talked about when the House and Senate bills are put onto the floor and those floor amendments happen. That's a key opportunity for folks who aren't on the Farm Bill to advocate for those constituents. So all members of Congress are fair game for sharing your ideas and thoughts with them. The president and your grassroots voices are critical. So in Ohio, as I mentioned, we've got Senator Sherrod Brown, who's been very active in engaging people around the state. We also have Representative Bob Gibbs from the 7th Congressional District and Representative Marcia Fudge in Ohio's 11th Congressional District. So taking this all to the next level, what can you do with this information and how can you engage? You know, there are a number of ways where you really have an important opportunity and multiple ways to share the priorities that you have for how this major legislation that affects the food and farm system in the United States is created, how it's structured, and how it's implemented on the ground. And one of the quickest and easiest ways for you to have an impact is by making a phone call. And if you visit OEFFA's policy page in the link that you'll see on the screen right now, on our advocacy toolkit, there's a wonderful script that was created by one of our partner organizations in North Carolina that shows someone going through the process of calling their member of Congress. You know, what kind of research do they do ahead of the call? What information do they have? What do they say? And it really helps remove a little bit of the fear or uncertainty about making these calls. Another important thing to know is that, when you make these calls, what usually happens is that you end up speaking with an intern, probably a 22-year-old intern who's doing some work for that member of Congress. So it's not that intimidating, but by calling, by sharing that you're a member of that representative's district, that you're a voter, and sharing the issues that you care about, it makes a real difference in terms of them knowing what their constituents support and don't support and how they should vote on some of these issues. So there are other ways to be part of the process in district meetings, and once you get started in the process and some of that fear and intimidation is removed, it's really energizing to have an opportunity to talk with your member of Congress when they're in your community. And if that's something that you are interested in doing, please stay in touch and call OEFFA. We have a lot of resources that we can provide in terms of helping to set up these meetings. We've worked with a lot of our members in doing this in the past. We can provide background information and talking points, as well as handouts and resources that can be really useful. And finally, there are also opportunities for folks to come to DC if you're really brave, energized, and engaged and want to be part of that process. Another piece that's really important is even writing opinion pieces or letters to the editor. Certainly, members of Congress pay very close attention to what's printed in the paper and what the opinions are of their constituents. So even if it doesn't matter if you're in a large metro area or it's a small regional newspaper, taking some time to write a 200-word letter to the editor about something that you think is really important and should be supported or included in the Farm Bill can make a very big difference. But there's been a lot of analysis of what's really effective, and I can't emphasize enough those brief phone calls really do have a very strong impact. So I want to just take a minute and see if, Amanda, do we have any questions? Has anybody typed anything into that chat box?
There is one so far, and they asked if you could clarify your statement about what created harmful algae blooms, and do you have science to back up that statement? That was the first question.
Okay. Well, certainly, there's a lot of science that's out there, and if you want to contact me directly, I'd be glad to send you some of that information. And people have a lot of thoughts and opinions about algal blooms in the state of Ohio, but certainly the focus has been on runoff, and it could be runoff of either synthetic inputs or even inputs of animal origin that can help contribute to phosphorus runoff that have created those algal blooms that we've seen not just in Lake Erie, but also in other smaller bodies of water in Ohio. Now, there are also other parts that contribute to that. They've looked at what they call CSOs, or combined sewer overflows of these old communities that have kind of outdated infrastructure, and some of the wastewater treatment and really heavy storm events can run off into waterways as well. So there's definitely always an ongoing debate about the sources of phosphorus runoff that's creating these algal blooms, but I think the majority of the data that's out there has showed that, certainly agriculture is one component of that. And Ohio has acknowledged that by creating some legislation in recent years that limits when manure can be applied, for example, to prevent some of those runoffs. So I hope that answers your question. Was there another question, Amanda?
Not yet. Nothing else has been submitted.
Okay, great. Well, good.
Go ahead and try to relaunch the poll we did initially. So Amalie and I knew that we would encounter one tech issue at least. And so I think it's with the polling. So we can go ahead and launch that same poll again. And it is set to do multiple, selections. So we'll see if it works, and just help us know. And so we can prepare for the next convening when we'll use these again. So I'll go ahead and launch it.
Great.
We'll see if it works this time.
Okay. So you'll see that poll to kind of see if you feel that this webinar helped you answer any of those questions that you had about the Farm Bill, about the titles, about the structure, about ways you can engage, about some of those marker bills that's part of the process. So please make sure to take a minute and fill out that last poll of the day today. And while we're waiting for everybody to finish that poll, again, I want to thank you for taking a little bit of your lunch hour just to learn a little bit more about the Farm Bill. There's so much information here. It's hard to not present too much, but I can't emphasize enough how important the days and the months ahead are, and how the role that you have, whether it's professionally or personally, there are ways that you can shape what our food and farm system looks like, what resources we have at the community level to be able to carry out programming that will help us be effective, help our communities be stronger, help farmers be profitable, and increase access to healthy food for the folks in our communities. So thanks for taking time in this webinar. Oh, great. Thanks for putting that up.
And then one more thing before we close. If your organization or you is interested in hosting one of the virtual convenings for the Ohio Food Policy Network, we are open to any suggestions. So feel free to volunteer yourself. Just send me an email with your organization and the topic you plan, and we'll get you scheduled.
Thank you. And, one last slide up here. There's some resources. There's my direct contact information. You're more than welcome to reach out to me via phone or email anytime. The National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and the National Organic Coalition have tremendous resources. NSAC has an ongoing blog about the Farm Bill, and OEFFA's policy page will be posting all of these marker bills. We currently have a poll. If you're interested in supporting the Local Farms Act, please go to our Farm Bill page, click on the Local Farms Act poll, and show that you support these programs, providing resources for local and regional food systems development. And stay in touch with your ideas and questions. If you have suggestions for this work, or if you're just interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to reach out and give us a call.
All right, we have one more question, Amalie. Will your slides be available? Can you share them?
Okay, great. Yes, this information is available. I know that Amanda has been recording this webinar, and she's going to make sure this information is posted and people have access to it after we're done recording today. If you're interested in other resources or specific slides, you can also contact me directly.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And just make sure to mark on your calendar. It's the third Thursday of each month at 12 p.m. for the virtual convenings.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Bye.